Don't put your yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. It is great to be with you here today. We had some crazy weather. Depending on where you are, you're going to be like, feeling like spring. Some people saying no. We are. I actually spent the entire week in central Canada. I was in Ontario all week. I spent the first part of the week in Toronto at an internal team meeting, and then I finished up the week in Ottawa, Ontario, at this Canadian Federation of Agriculture's Ag Leaders Debate. We had the 5 major parties getting together and kind of breaking down the biggest issues in the industry. And I've got some things to talk about from that here a little bit on the program. Maybe we'll do a little bit at the back end of the show. We're also going to hear today from the executive director of CAFTA. That CAFTA is the organization that represents all the exportable commodities. So just think about like canola and pork and beef, aquaculture, and talking to Michael Harvey about their trip to Washington, D.C. last week and what they heard and what they talked about with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. Of course, there's a lot of trade issues between Canada and the U.S. right now. Things have been a little bit calmer here the last, probably 3 weeks, probably 4 weeks. Feeling a little bit better about things, but not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination from a Canadian perspective. And I wanted to get CAFTA's viewpoint on some of those conversations. Also, we've got a product spotlight today with Syngenta Canada, so we're going to hear from Marijke Vanderlaan today on the program as well. So if you have any feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's get to that conversation with Michael Harvey of CAFTA. This was recorded on a Monday afternoon, fresh off the trip to D.C., and let's hear what Mr. Harvey had to say from CAFTA. Okay, who is all on the trip to Washington, D.C.?
Basically all of our membership. I mean, we had the Cattle Association, the Pork Council, the Canola Growers, the Canola Council, Crop Life, Grain Growers of Canada, Food Health and Consumer Products of Canada, Sugar Institute, Pulse Canada. We had basically all of our members came down with us.
And purpose of the trip, talk about the importance of trade, I'm assuming?
Talk about the importance of trade and also hear things ourselves on the ground. I'd say a couple of the members of the group go to DC frequently. I don't so often myself, others don't. We see a lot and hear a lot in the media, but to go down and hear people talking in closed rooms is a better way to get a feel for the situation on the ground.
Okay, so what's the feel for the situation on the ground? What did you discover doing your ground truthing?
So I spoke to different people. I'm not going to name anybody by name as a better way to tell you how the meetings went. I'd say most of our meetings were on Capitol Hill. So they were with congressmen or women or staffers, a mix of Republicans and Democrats. Democrats maybe a little bit less useful and that they're very critical of what the president's doing. And that's obvious.
And zero influence.
So you get less sort of insight there, though one should still do it. Republicans more interesting. I'd say in general, Republicans, both congressmen and staffers indicated to us that they were strongly supportive of the president. But on the specific question of tariffs, they kept using the phrase that they were giving the president some runway, which I took as a not very committal type of support of the president.
I think one of the big questions is, okay, so that I think it's a reasonable metaphor. How long's the runway? Is this a runway for a 172 Cessna, or is this a runway for, a Dreamliner?
So these people are politicians and people who answered politicians. So I think the runway for them is largely political in nature, and that runway can change a lot based on what they're hearing from their constituents.
Yeah.
How nervous they're getting about things like midterms, things like elections in 4 years. I mean, these people live in permanent campaigns to a certain extent, and they're constantly recalculating these things. But I think they're also calculating the influence the president has over their careers. Of course, it's a pretty disciplined group, and people who disagree with the president publicly have been known to pay a price for that, and that's part of the calculation, right?
Did you get a sense, Michael, how Canada is viewed versus the rest of the global population? I sort of thought on April 2nd, when we saw, the president roll out his poster boards, the reciprocal tariffs that he has since given a 90-day reprieve on, that Canada and Mexico were sort of pushed to the side. It was, we're going to deal with these other countries maybe first or in a different way. What's your read on those events?
So the first read, and this can be a little bit humbling, although I knew this was going to happen, you go into meetings in DC and it quickly becomes clear to you that these are not people who are spending a lot of time thinking about Canada and thinking about Canadian agri-food trade, right? You're in an extremely competitive environment for any slice of these people's attention span. A lot of the people we were speaking to, if you look at the staffers, were like the trade policy advisors to Congress people. So people think about trade all the time, and they're not thinking about Canada all day long either, right? In Canada, we are looking every day at what the president's doing to us, and what he's doing to the rest of the world is sort of part of the fact matrix. But if you're one of these staffers in Washington, it's the whole world at the same time. So when they come down and some Canadians sit down to talk to them about Canadian agri-food trade, well, they focus on it for half an hour, but they haven't been for half an hour otherwise.
Is that an advantage or disadvantage?
That's a fact. That's a fact. We can discuss whether or not it's an advantage or a disadvantage. It's just the situation, right? I did get a lot of goodwill. I mean, people were very polite. People were very pleasant. Happy to have you here. Some people made specific comments about how they thought it was very unfortunate, some of the rhetoric that's come out of the White House about Canada. I even got that from a couple of Republicans. Got that from almost every Democrat, right? So people overwhelmingly goodwill to Canada. Some people aware of some of the irritants with Canada and brought them up maybe as a way of supporting the president. But nobody had deep knowledge of anything related to Canada.
Okay, so evaluation then. No, so knowing all of that, you kind of set the stage. Successful trip, or what's the outcome of it? Did mission accomplished, or?
Well, expectation settings. We didn't think that a group of Canadian Agri-Food Alliance members was going to flip President Trump's position on tariffs and the world trading system, right?
Yeah.
But the goal of the trip being to increase awareness, I think, was positive. The goal of the trip being to increase our own knowledge of the situation on the ground, so we could bring that back to Canada, I think positive. Got a lot of media pickup in the ag sector in particular, people like you reaching out to me for interviews, for quotes. So in terms of raising the awareness of the importance of Canadian agri-food trade in the U.S., I think was very positive. But let's keep that expectation level reasonable. The United States is going to make its decisions based on their own domestic calculations, and those calculations are playing out.
We've been talking to Michael Harvey, who's executive director with CAFTA. It's interesting. I also talked to members of and staff of Canadian Federation of Agriculture that were also in Washington, D.C. on another trip, and they crossed paths with some of the CAFTA members who were down there at a reception. And what it seems everybody's hearing the same sort of thing from members of Congress in the U.S. is that trade with Canada is important. And they're not sold necessarily on the tariffs, but they're giving the president some runway on all of this. And so here we sit. and Canada kind of a bit of a holding pattern indeed. Well, when we come back here on Real Ag on the Weekend, we're going to continue our conversation with Michael Harvey. He's Executive Director of CAFTA, and we'll be right back here on Real Ag on the Weekend right after this. If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Maximize productivity and profitability with an innovative all-in-one approach to farming. Combining accounting, business planning, agronomic field planning, and advanced technology, MNP Ag Intellect delivers personalized solutions that empower you to make confident, data-driven decisions. Visit mnp.ca today.
Trade is so important to Western Canada, and we're going to continue the conversation that I had with Michael Harvey, who is the Executive Director with CAFTA. And I asked Michael, if American farmers were listening right now to the show, what would you tell them about the benefits of trade with Canada?
So I'd say to American farmers, the discussion around tariffs is bad for you. Undermining Canada-U.S. trade is bad for you. Undermining USMCA is bad for you. Canadian agri-food products reduce your input costs. They make you more competitive globally. They allow you to be part of a more efficient trading system and a more efficient supply chain that allows you to get a higher value out of your products that you sell abroad. So when anything is being done by the U.S. administration, the U.S. government to weaken all that, that's bad for you as U.S. Farmers.
But bad from the perspective of financially, or bad in what context?
Financially, it costs you money if you're a U.S. farmer because you're going to pay more for inputs. It costs you opportunities to trade abroad because you're pushing other countries to put up trade barriers against you as a reaction to the tariffs that you're putting on them. It makes you less efficient by not being part of a broader supply chain that gets you better inputs at a better cost. So it's bad for you financially. It makes you weaker. It makes you poorer.
Are there, from your perspective, are there items or components of CUSMA USMCA to, lack of a better term, clean up or fix and improve in a renegotiation?
Say there's always room for improvement, but overwhelmingly the room for improvement comes in working together better, not in working less together. So if you look at the Regulatory Cooperation Council, which is about the three countries aligning the regulatory systems to reduce costs for businesses, that council could meet more often with a more solid agenda to get more things done. We want to really converge around regulation. That would be a positive. So there's always room for improvement, but overwhelmingly, I'd say do no harm. Right now, we've got an agreement that's very good, that represents a lot of years of confidence between the three countries. And eating away in that confidence is not in anybody's interest.
How some people have described to me when they do a lot of lobbying in DC for Canadian organizations or for Canadian interests, sometimes I'll hear that the closer you get to the Canadian-U.S. border, the more awareness there is versus, say, if I'm picking on states here, I'm not anyone in particular, but Louisiana or a Florida is going to be different than, say, North Dakota or Montana. Is that fair?
I think that's generally true. But then there's other people who've developed a specific interest in the bilateral relationship for their own reasons. I mean, Canada's a big trading partner for all the states.
Yeah.
Not just the ones on the border, but obviously people on the border, they'll tell you often, oh, you're Canadian, and they'll start with a personal story. There were a couple of meetings we had where they started talking about Winnipeg Jets games because they were from North Dakota, that sort of thing. So obviously that kind of personal connection puts things in the right, how can I say, just in the right sort of emotional state, right?
Yeah. So is this something that CAFTA in the membership intend to do on a more regular basis, or is this kind of a one and done sort of kind of trip?
I think all of us are going to go to Washington more often than we have. We all have bandwidth issues. We're organizations that generally focus on our work in Canada. But it's quite clear right now that the risks involved in our relationship with the United States are such that we're all pivoting, to use one of the words that everyone loves nowadays. We're pivoting to do more work on Washington right now as this political risk plays out.
Have we, based on what you're hearing from your members, has there been any, are we seeing actual deterrent of trade flows, like tariffs on, tariffs off? Obviously there's tariffs on when it comes to the auto sector. But for for goods that are USMCA compliant, they're, business as usual. So have we seen a restriction of trade flows at all, even with that situation being true?
So early days, I mean, trade flows aren't normally measured on a daily sort of basis. There are all kinds of analysts out there who are studying how ships are getting loaded up and where they're offloading and this and that. But I haven't seen much in the way of solid data. If you look at things like Canadians' trips to the United States, you're seeing big movement in the numbers really quickly. Things like goods, it'll play out over a longer period of time. What I would say is if you're the type of person who manages political risk, that's gone way up, right? And I think when you look at how the stock market is gyrated with a general downward slope, that's an expression of overall confidence in the economy. And it's quite obvious that the investors in the stock market think that the future returns of big American companies are lower now than they were a couple months ago, right? So that sort of thing, that doesn't play out over 24 hours. We'll see over the coming months, but things will play out. But also remember, you know what? He's only been in power for a little while. And the tariffs are on pause, on pause, on pause. It's a little bit hard to follow. So like the facts haven't played out that much yet. There's a lot more noise than fact in most sectors, especially in agri-food, where USMCA compliant goods have not been affected by the tariffs. So this is going to be a medium and long-term play to a large extent.
Yeah, and you got some insight because you heard Bob Lighthizer, former USTR, speak in Toronto as well.
Bob Lighthizer is an interesting person. His book, which is very cheap on Amazon, for somebody who wants to read it, gives you a pretty good insight into sort of the intellectual underpinnings of a strategy to relocate manufacturing to the United States, from the perspective of somebody who thinks that the global trading system has been very harmful to U.S. manufacturing. I don't agree with much of the man's thesis, but you have to give him credit for pushing his thesis when probably 99% of economists would disagree with what he's pushing. I'd also think you can overestimate sometimes how important the intellectual underpinnings of the strategy are in the president's decision-making on a daily basis, which doesn't always look super strategic from the outside, generally doesn't look super strategic and doesn't look like he really sticks to his decisions a lot of the time. So it's hard to say, but Bob Lighthizer does make a theory for the case, which though I don't agree with it, I think it's insightful to listen to it.
We've been talking to Michael Harvey. He's executive director at CAFTA. We'll be right back here on RealAg on the weekend with my thoughts on the CFA Ag Leaders Debate. We've also got a product spotlight from Syngenta coming up right after this. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday, we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire, and we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern, and don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The following is a paid-for product spotlight from Syngenta Canada.
I am Lindsay Smith, and joining me now is Marijke Vanderlaan. She's with Syngenta, and she also loves wheat. And that's what we're going to talk about on this product spotlight. Marijke, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
All right. Now, wheat is, well, there's a couple people that really do love wheat. Specifically, though, you are learning some really cool stuff with the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network. How is that sort of informing the decisions that you're making on staging wheat and those management decisions this spring?
Yeah, great question, Lindsay. I mean, for me, it really did start with the yen. You know what? Actually, honestly, it started with Modus, because when we launched Modus, we had to really get up close and personal with the wheat and cut open stems and figure out staging. But then I would say for me, it was really with the yen signing up. I signed up my dad's wheat field 2 years ago. And really what it taught me was not the big report that we got at the end of the year, which had a ton of information, a ton of details. I realized it was actually the simple details that actually matter, which is understanding what's happening in your field when. So with the yen, what was beautiful about that project was we had to go to the same 10 spots in the field multiple times in the season, doing soil samples, tissue samples, harvest samples. But it just got me really to know that wheat crop a whole lot better. And now I just look back, I'm like, yeah, if we can just get these simple details figured out, we can bring our management to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned Modus, of course. You mentioned that critical staging and making the most of this product. What have you learned with making PGR decisions within the yen?
Yeah, so you know, when we launched Modus, we were really excited about the optimal window, which was growth stage 30 to 32. So we were very busy cutting open stems, trying to figure out, are we at growth stage 30 yet? I mean, what I've learned is, you know, that's the optimal window, which is actually quite wide, 30 to 32. And it is very okay to wait until we can actually feel that first node, which for anyone can go to a wheat field and just dig up a plant and feel that first node and know, oh, growth stage 31, we're here. That's when we're having that hormone kind of spike, gibberellin hormone that's going to cause that cell elongation and cause that stem to elongate. So that's when we want to get the Modus on there. And I mean, what we've learned too, we've done lots of stem counts. And I know I just had a call a few minutes ago from a farmer. I have 3 to 4 tillers, you know, or 3 to 4 stems per plant. Is my wheat going to lodge? Is Modus enough? So we talk through that. And I mean, I think that's something that we're still learning is when we go out to the field about now and we see that we have 3 tillers per plant and that main stem, is every single tiller going to make a head and cause lodging issues? So the number I like to use is about 65 to 70 strong stems per plant, or per square foot, I should say. So when you go to the field, if you have 7.5-inch wheat, you count out 19.2 inches of row. And if you have more than 65 strong stems in that distance, that's the equivalent of a square foot, that is going to be a candidate for Modus. Now, there's other things we need to keep in mind: nitrogen, what's that background, just fertility, what is the variety we're growing in terms of risk for lodging, all of those things.
Now, one of the other things, and this of course jumps forward in the growing season, but one of the other things I think that goes hand in hand with thinking about stem counts, heads, the uniformity of a crop, that then, of course, to me, think fungicide timing, stress events, those sorts of things. What have you learned about sort of some of these different stress points in the season and making decisions with them as well?
Yeah, I think going back to the yen, I mean, one of the big data points that came out of that is biomass. Growers with the most biomass are getting the biggest yields. And so we got to protect that with MODIS, plant growth regulator. But the other piece to this big biomass, and when farmers are managing the details, managing that wheat crop intensively, we need to think about that fungicide. There's going to be more stress from a disease perspective. We're creating that environment for things like here in Ontario, powdery mildew is kind of our number one. And powdery mildew, in terms of like a leaf or stem disease, kind of most years, stripe rust last year would have been the number one. But kind of most years, powdery mildew, that can really impact the standability of our crop as well. So we have to get a fungicide on with MODIS. Our fungicide is Miravis Neo, and we've seen that because it's 3 modes of action, has plant health benefits, we've really seen that bring yield levels to the next level. So we're seeing like 4 bushels over and above some of the 2 mode of action products we've used in the past. So really nice opportunity there to stack the deck in your favor with stacked cereals. So there's Neo, there's MODIS, and then something that we've been quite intrigued by is our biostimulant Megafol, which is a product that's actually targeting abiotic stress. And that's something we haven't always talked a lot about, but this is a new opportunity that we can explore as well. So Megafol at 0.5 liter is another product you can stack on top of your fungicide base or your PGR base and use that if your wheat crop is dealing with some abiotic stress, too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry.
Which does happen. Now, last question for you, Marijke. Certainly, I think one of the side benefits of something like the yen is this collective learning, is this, drilling down to management decisions for sure. But of course, all of it comes down to trying to capture that profit per acre. Yeah. And, thinking about the last few years of this evolution of what we've learned about managing this crop, how has sort of the mindset changed with farmers on the profit potential of the wheat crop?
Yeah, I think there is a group of farmers now that they know they can have a profitable wheat crop, whereas historically it was like, it's just my rotational crop. I mean, we've learned from the yen, the farmers that are putting in the inputs, so to speak, they are lowering their cost of production. They are growing a profitable acre of wheat. It's really cool to see, again, going back to the details conversation. It's some of these simple details that really matter. And we really feel that the stack cereal approach with Syngenta does target these details that really matter. So the things we've talked about, and then the final piece, of course, would be that T3 fungicide, and ours is Miravis Ace, giving you really clean straw, really clean grain. And another opportunity to try Megafol if our crop then is under stress. So all of these details matter. All of these, tools in the toolbox can help us get that profitable acre.
That was Marijke Vanderlaan and a product spotlight paid for by Syngenta. When we come back, I've got some thoughts on the CFA Ag Leaders debate. We'll get to that when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag on the Weekend.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
With volatile markets and rising costs, now's your chance to be part of the solution. Act now to protect your farm's future for generations with Genesis Fertilizers. Gain control and ensure access to locally produced nitrogen. Visit genesisfertilizers.com to learn more.
Welcome back to RealAg on the weekend. And happy Easter to everybody as well. I didn't say it at the beginning of the show. Happy Easter. Hopefully you're having yourself a great time with some family, maybe some friends. And, for a lot of the people in the cropping sector, Easter is kind of that, it's kind of that lead, that sort of that last sort of breath before, things really get unleashed from a busy standpoint. Of course, some of you that are ranching, you're probably, there's nothing off about this. We're into calving, but I know many of you will take some time as well to spend some good time together on this Easter weekend, and the Easter Bunny treats you all good, and all of those kinds of things. We've talked today about trade. We heard from Michael Harvey from CAFTA, and I hope you enjoyed that conversation. There was nothing really, shockingly surprising out of what he had to say. It was interesting, some of his thoughts about his listening to that presentation from former USTR Bob Lighthizer. What I also got a chance, as I mentioned this week, I was in Ottawa and got a chance to moderate again the Canadian Federation of Agriculture's Ag Leaders Debate. This is where they bring together the major parties and they have a debate about some of the agricultural issues. And it's kind of interesting because there's some real similarities, and of course then there are some differences. And you try to really listen closely and pick out some of those differences. And really this election that's going to happen on April 28th comes down to essentially the Conservatives and the Liberals. And to really simplify things, you've got the Ag Minister, Mr. Cody Blois, who's out of Nova Scotia, who's been has been very, very vocal and a participant in the Ag Committee, Ag Minister for essentially a week. On the Conservative side, you've got longtime Shadow Minister of Agriculture, John Barlow, out of Alberta. And a lot of the things that Blois says and all the things that Barlow says are actually quite similar. One thing I'm going to say to you that, I don't know, it may upset some of you. I don't know. Like some of you probably have spent you've seen more of John Barlow than you've seen of Cody Blois. So Cody Blois has been who is the Liberal Ag Minister. He took over from Lawrence Macaulay. He's been out to Western Canada quite a bit. But what I will tell you this, okay? Whether you know either of these two guys or not, what the people that do, I've heard a common thread. No matter who wins, the Conservatives or the Liberals, agriculture is in very good direct hands because there's a high level of respect for both Cody Blois and John Barlow. I'll even say that personally, that both of them are great guys, personally or from a supporter of agriculture standpoint. So I think that's a real positive. Well, we hear a lot from the Conservatives, and now let's expand this a little bit to just talk about the election in general. Is that it was interesting. I was on the Ryan. I was doing this podcast, and one of the things that I mentioned that Mark Carney and the Liberals, they've kind of stolen a lot of, and it sort of popped the balloon a little bit on the Conservative platform, but what we've seen is they've stolen or borrowed, however you want to put that, some of the Conservative policies, and it's moved the Liberals, further to that that economic center. And it's kind of left the Conservatives talking about, why didn't you do this the past 9-10 years? Seems like you just kind of you had different ideas, and obviously the environment was very, very important to you. And now all of a sudden you're thinking more like an economic centrist than maybe you were previously, which has led to some, really the Conservatives trying to find a lane. Now, no matter where you feel on polls, it looks like the polls have tightened up a little bit. We're down to about a 2% lead now for the Liberals. And because of the lack of efficiency of the Conservative votes, that still leads to a pretty significant victory by the Liberals based on expected vote distribution across the country. When we look at the Ag Leaders debate, there was a lot of talk about infrastructure. There was a lot of talk about the need for agriculture to, close the gap on some of the labor deficits that we have. There was a lot of talk about interprovincial trade. There was talk about the need to diversify agricultural trade as well. But there was also talk about the importance of the United States. Now, all the parties, I'm not sure, totally agreed on that in terms of how Canada should cut its path going forward when it comes to dealing with the U.S. But I think there was a general recognition there that trade with the U.S. is pretty darn important to the future of the Canadian economy, never mind just agriculture. There was a lot more focus from the Greens and from the NDP when it comes to more domestic trade, for sure. Conservatives definitely support dropping interprovincial barriers. So does the Liberals. So it was hard to find much difference there. Maybe how they go about it is a little bit different, but they're very much all talking about that. And of course, supply management. And this is one I really tried with my co-moderator, Martin Menard, to try to find the differences here. All the parties, as you would expect, and we've seen on the campaign trail, very verbally supporting and saying we will protect supply management. All of them, let's just stick right now to the Liberals and the Conservatives. Both Boyce and Barlow also said that they feel they can protect supply management and negotiate free trade deals going forward. Well, we're going to put that to the test, no matter who wins the election, if Pierre Poilievre is the future Prime Minister of the country, or if it's Mr. Carney is the future Prime Minister of the country. That theory is going to be put to test very quickly in trying to deal with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his trade agenda, which is a rather aggressive one. I've been maintaining and I've been saying that, and I can just communicate what I've been told on numerous occasions. The U.S. is not looking to end supply management. So I think no matter who the Prime Minister is, they're going to be able to follow through on their, we're going to protect supply management. But are there concessions that come with that? And are those concessions market access concessions, or are they meeting the U.S. definition of the tariff rate quotas, which is what the American dairy groups are telling me that they're going after? They want Canada to meet the definition of the TRQ allocations that they have, not the Canadian definition. And this is what they've been fighting about since the CUSMA or USMCA agreement was even signed. So there is a little bit of nuance to this discussion, but nothing much has changed. The two major parties talking about how trade is important. There's probably more discussion now about interprovincial trade, but there's talk about need to diversify markets, the importance of the U.S., and protecting supply management all at the same time. Can they do it? Time will, of course, tell on that one. I encourage you to go to the Canadian Federation of Agriculture's YouTube page, and I encourage you to check out what was said in the debate. It's a couple hours long, and I encourage you to listen to what all the parties had to say: the NDP, the Greens, the Bloc, the Liberals, and the Conservatives. Very interesting how the Liberals, the Bloc, and the Conservatives, in many cases, kind of saying the same things on some of these files. Very fascinating indeed. Listen to the debate, or watch the debate, I should say, and then send me your feedback. SHaney@RealAgriculture.com or the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. And finally, I want to wish everybody out there in the audience a very happy Easter. Enjoy yourselves, have fun with family, and we'll talk to you again next week. Cheers, everybody.